Right, so I'm changing up the format of the editing. I'm going to more of a commentary style because I'm thinking if I'm talking about Ineos, Anthony, Casemiro, whoever it is, do we really need to see their faces on the screen, or should I just put some gameplay footage? And then I can still put up some tactical images and things like that, but just get more videos out throughout the month. So that's the way I'm going to be doing it moving forward. Expect a lot more videos. But for this video, I'm going to be looking at what Manchester United's biggest problems are. So the obvious one that we need to fix immediately is set pieces. I think you could literally have 4K 360 view cameras at a Diddy party and see less violations than we're seeing week in, week out when defending set pieces. We literally signed a set-piece coach in the summer, Andreas Georgeson, I think his name is, and now I think Carlos Fernandez is taking over defensive set-pieces. But honestly, what the hell's going on? I think a few weeks ago it was like 42% of our goals had been conceded from set-pieces, and the league average was 11. What is the point in having a set-piece coach if you're that bad at set-pieces? We'd honestly actually just be better just telling everyone to man-to-man mark someone, rather than doing this weird zonal thing where no one really knows who's picking up who. For some reason, we just allow players to just stand right next to Onana, completely sandwich him, without anyone even moving between or pushing him out. The set pieces are a complete farce in themselves. If we fix that, if we just got ourselves to the average, both defensively and offensively, I think we'd improve massively. But apart from set pieces, United's biggest problems stem from the failures of previous transfer windows. We should have just given Ralf Rangnick the job of Director of Football back in 2022. Reportedly, Rangnick had said that Ten Hag had his own ideas and there wasn't much coordination between what they wanted to do. Why on earth would we sign a manager before we sign a director of fucking football? It doesn't make any sense. If you look at the players that Rangnick had reportedly suggested, and then what Ten Hag did over the next 2.5 years, not just signing players like Anthony and Casemiro, but almost getting rid of players like Ahmad, and getting rid of players like Alvaro Fernandez or Yedeli, even Alanga would have been a decent option at this point. The actual squad building strategy behind the transfers has been nothing short of horrific. The biggest issues in the squad are Casemiro, Anthony and Mount, because we've somehow sunk nearly £200 million in transfer fees and around £40 million in salaries each season on 3 players that have declined so quickly that they offer Amorim practically nothing more than a body to use from the bench. Mount is also injured every other game when he does actually play, because when he does actually play he does look pretty good, he just is never fit, but we can't shift any of them and we can't even recruit probably 10% of what we paid for them. The main issues don't stem from prior to Ten Hag. Everyone goes on about we need to get rid of these players. The players have gone. The issues are coming from the players that we brought in when Ten Hag was there. Even if we did manage to allow Anthony and Casemiro to leave on loans or frees in January, we still might have to subsidise about 50% of their huge wage packages. Mount is in the same spot as Shaw, where we have to get them fit, try to keep them fit for a decent amount of period before the next transfer window, which will probably be the summer, and then just ship them out the first opportunity we can. Also, am I the only one thinking, how do we still have no money, but Barcelona and Chelsea for years have been pulling off transfers that we wouldn't even be able to do if we did have the finances? That 2022 summer transfer window has to go down as one of the worst of all time. Casemiro was excellent for the first season, but Brazilian players never age well into their 30s when they are already on big money, and his decline has been so rapid that I would literally rather use Sekou Kone for the second half of the season when he comes back, because even if Casemiro puts in a 7 out of 10 performance, like I'd say he did against Victoria Pilsen, we've seen throughout the last 18 months one good performance followed by 2 average games and then a truly horrific game. Anthony is horrific most of the time he plays, to the point where when he actually successfully switches play with a long pass, I have to actually remember this is a standard piece of play that any half-decent winger should be able to do consistently in the Premier League. Anthony, if we are being real, was only worth £40 million when we paid £85 million. Now he's probably worth less than 20, and that's not even factoring in that his salary is close to £10 million a season. We've also actively made the individual ability in our side substantially worse, and not only did we pay huge fees to replace those players, but we also got rid of players for literally nothing in the case of Ronaldo and Pogba. In the summer of 2022, if we had just told Ronaldo that he wasn't in Ten Hag's plans, we could have allowed him to leave for another club in Europe 6 months before he did, and finished on a good note. If he was going to Saudi, considering that he'd only been at United 1 year, and he's the most marketable player in world football, we could have gotten some sort of transfer fee that would have allowed us to replace him with someone better than Wout Weghorst. And we did the same with Pogba. Why didn't we just sell him 2 years or even a year before we did? If we didn't want to offer him a new contract, how does it make sense to let him run it down, let him leave on a free, and then have to pay money to replace him? Even though in hindsight we probably lucked our way out of the Pogba situation eventually, we still didn't fully replace him as we signed Christian Eriksen, who was a decent stopgap option for the short term, but whose idea was it to go with a double pivot of Casemiro and Eriksen for the full season, even the first season? Surely we should not have spent £60 million on one central midfielder, particularly an ageing central midfielder on £18 million a season, if the player they were going to be partnering was literally a player who really just didn't have the legs to play there in their peak, mainly because they weren't even a central midfielder, and by the time we had signed them, he'd already had a cardiac arrest. I mean, that has to be the most Manchester United transfer of all time. Also, even though Lenny Yoro is long-term a good signing, how the hell did we end up paying over £50 million for an 18-year-old who had just 1 year left on his contract when Real Madrid had pulled out of the race at around £25 million? Spending £50 million on a promising teenage talent at centre-back is a luxury that United couldn't afford. If you look at Amorim or even Ten Hag's best 11s, Yoro probably doesn't even make it yet, with Mazraoui, De Ligt and Martinez being Amorim's best back three at the moment. So from a squad building perspective, it makes absolutely no sense to drop £50 million on an inexperienced centre-back instead of the centre of midfield or left back position, and this is prior to even Amorim coming in and needing wing backs, which means that now we need wing backs for both sides alongside a central midfielder, and this is before even improving the forward line. And just to be clear, it's not a rebuild, we're not doing another rebuild, we can't afford to do another rebuild, we've got to have imminent success, otherwise we're just going to end up like AC Milan or even Liverpool before Klopp. Maybe even worse, because the level of the Premier League is so much higher now than it was in the 2010s and 2000s. We need to undo the damage that Ineos and Ten Hag have done over the last 2 or 3 seasons. The United recruitment team and even the fan base have become so obsessed with signing young players to the point that we've been prioritising signing young, fairly unproven players who probably need 3 to 4 years to develop into reliable first team starters week in week out in the form of Højlund and Euro, but have managed to spend £120 million in the process. Surely we would have been better off just signing a ready-made player around their mid-20s. I mean, look at Rafinha at Barcelona. He cost £35 million less than Antony did in that same summer, and he was already proven in the Premier League over the last 2 seasons. But the thought of signing a young player from a foreign land and having them come in and be one of the best players in the league is such an obsession at United, even though in reality it rarely ever works out, that we end up turning up our nose at good options like Alex Garcia and Cyril Guirassy last season, who in their mid-20s had taken some time to develop, but would have been worth the risk for the fees paid, because Guirassy cost £17.5 million and Garcia cost Leverkusen £15 million. Combined, that is less than the transfer fees that we paid for Euro and Agate individually. I mean, the whole Ten Hag situation has obviously set us back about a season or 2, which is pretty obvious because it was such a bad decision to keep him in the summer that we now have to sack him mid-season, give him a massive payoff, and then to make matters worse, you're bringing in a manager with a completely different system, no pre-season, no transfer window for the first 2 months of his tenure, and most importantly, he's playing a back-three system and we don't have any natural wing-backs, or even any wingers apart from Ahmad who could be converted into that role. And if you thought that was bad, he doesn't even have any young players to look at from the under-21s to bring up, because the previous manager didn't fancy them, wanted to keep Antony, Casemiro and Eriksen, Lindelof and Johnny Evans, who I legitimately thought last summer wouldn't get into another Premier League side. He'd literally probably either be retired or be playing Championship football at this point. Ten Hag wanted to keep him over Cambuala. And now with Alvaro Fernandez, Maxi Oyedele, Cambuala, even someone like Alanga and McTominay, to be honest, we haven't really got any academy products who are reliable enough to promote in this situation, who you look at and go, yeah, they're ready to come in and make an impact. I mean, Alvaro Fernandez walks into this side literally because we don't have, or we seem to never have a fit left back, with Malacia and Shaw always injured. And even when Malacia is fit, I'd still say Alvaro Fernandez is better. I mean, we could have done with Maxi Oyedele to come in for Casemiro at this point. Instead, we sold him for peanuts, completely forgot about him, and then went on to the new next toy, which was Sekou Kone, who's obviously not ready yet for Manchester United first team football. He's not even played a game in Europe before he made that move. So why would we sell Oyedele, who was on the cusp of being ready, had performed well in pre-season, for basically nothing, so we don't even get the money to reinvest, when he alongside Alvaro Fernandez should have been walking into this United side, taking some of the pressure off Mainu and Agate, because with Casemiro and Eriksen just not even really worth pursuing in an aggressive pressing system, they just don't fit it at all. You've got no natural central midfielder who can come in and play alongside either Bruno Fernandes or Kobbie Mainoo. And so that's why Agate, probably just because of squad selection, might be one of our most important players, because if he gets injured for a long period of time, we've now got to rely on Casemiro, which as you saw last season, is something that we should definitely not be doing. There's no point raving about how great our under-18s are if the under-21s just sit in the youth system without any credible loans, and then they don't even get a fair opportunity in the first team when the first team players are performing at a level that's probably below even mid-table. Just the transfer strategy in general has no coherent plan. I mean, just think about it logically. The fact that we didn't replace Casemiro, Eriksen, Antony, Malacia, Shaw or Sancho this summer, was it really a wise decision to sell Camboala for £4.6 million initially, and then go and buy another inexperienced centre-back in Lenny Yoro for £52 million? Camboala isn't the level that Manchester United need on current ability, but on current ability neither is Yoro. Maybe in 4 or 5 years the deal, if Yoro reaches his potential but also extends his contract, because at the current rate he might not even want to do that, it obviously then looks like a shrewd signing. But then you're still losing £45 million on the deal this summer, and not for a ready-made elite level centre-back, but basically just for potential, which doesn't really help us much this season, especially considering we already brought in De Ligt and Mazraoui, who can play at centre-back and right-sided centre-back. And we also have Harry Maguire as a central centre-back, who on current ability is definitely a more reliable option than Yoro. From a squad building perspective, it would have made far more sense just to keep Fernandes, Oyedele and Camboala for squad depth, give them time to transition from youth football to first team football, and then done our best to move on as many of Casemiro, Antony, Eriksen, Luke Shaw, Malacia, Johnny Evans and Lindelof, and then also just promoted Dangor and Toby Collier to fill the central midfield spots. This summer we could have literally replaced the current dead wood with players who maybe aren't at the level long term that we need in the squad, but based on their current ability, their energy and their potential, alongside the fact they aren't even on huge wages either, there's no way you're telling me it's a better option to sell them than to keep the players that we've kept. I actually cannot comprehend how United this summer thought it was a better idea to keep Casemiro and Eriksen over Oyedele, Gore and Collier. I know Gore and Collier are still at the club, but they haven't really been given an opportunity in the first team. I mean, we'd already rebuilt most of the squad by this summer, with players like De Ligt, Mazraoui and Agate improving us instantly, even probably Xerxes as well, because we didn't have that type of centre forward in the squad. We just then went out and ripped out everything underneath it, so beyond the starting 11, we have to rely on the Ten Hag Mafia, rather than our own young players who all, at the very least, should have been given a better chance than they were. Yeah, but it's been half a season and Camboala's barely played for Villarreal, so obviously we shouldn't have kept him. Well, that's what was said about Alvaro Fernandes when Ten Hag sent him on loan in the second half of last season, despite ending Sergio Reguilon's loan early. I could maybe understand if we were getting big enough fees for these players that we could then reinvest and improve the squad, but we are selling them for peanuts, hoping that in a few years if they turn out half decent we can then re-sign them for a moderate fee. What the hell is the point in doing that? We needed them now, and in 2 or 3 years if we rebuild correctly, we probably won't need an Oyedele or a Camboala, because we should be developing the youth players in a generation under them to come through as squad players in those years, as we should have been doing with the under-21s over the past few seasons. Those three, along with maybe even Dangor and Toby Collier, should have been promoted to the squad with the view of being reliable, low-salary squad players for the next 2 to 4 years, wherefrom they are either developed into players who are good enough long-term to be squad players or even first-team players, or sold for fees around 20 to maybe 30 or 35 million pounds. That can then be reinvested into transfers for truly elite level players that will take our squad to the next level. That's how the youth system should work, but if you have a manager who doesn't trust youth, which Ten Hag definitely didn't as we saw with the whole Ahmad and Antony situation, then you basically lose 3 or 4 young players who could have filled spots in the squad. Now you've got to replace Casemiro, Antony, Eriksen, whoever it is, and you've actually got to go out and sign players now. You can't even look to the under-21s because they've been purged of the majority of their talent. So to round it up, the main issues are set pieces, particularly defensive set pieces. I mean, that alone is costing us games where we go down a goal needlessly because of the issues at defensive set pieces. We're then immediately on the back foot, and that just derails the whole game plan. You've then also got the transfers from previous summers, Mount, Casemiro and Antony, which has left us with £200 million worth of players who not only don't improve our starting 11, but because of eternal injuries, decline and just not being good enough, don't even provide reliable squad depth at this point. And finally, selling off young players for peanuts that we can't even reinvest when they should have been players who are getting game time ahead of the deadwood that should have been shipped in the summer. Set pieces, squad building strategy behind the transfers, and the pipeline from the under-21s to the first team. Those are the big 3. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this style of video with just a gameplay, let me know because I can get more videos out, probably 1, maybe more a day. Let me know in the comments. Also sign up to my Patreon. I'll leave it linked in all the usual places.